We start actually at the beginning. We begin a new Masechet. So let me tell you a few things about the Masechet. First of all, in some Rishonim, although obviously in the ancient world, books were named after their first word, hence the name of Parshiot and the name of the Sfarim and the Chumash and so on, and therefore this is named Beitzah because that's the first word. Nevertheless, there were other names as well, and the Rishonim sometimes call this Maseches Yom Tov, because really the whole Masechet, it's a short Masechet, but it all deals with aspects of Yom Tov. The first Beitzah deals a lot with Muktzah, and Muktzah sort of scattered throughout the Gemara. A lot of it is in Shabbos, but a high concentration is in the first parak. The second parak begins with the discussion of Erev Tavshilin, actually, but gets into a lot of other like Durabbanans that are apply on Yom Tov. The third parak starts with issues that relate to actually the malachos, what things are mutter on Yom Tov, because Yom Tov you can do meleches ochel nefesh, and then as it continues, the fourth and the fifth parak, a lot of different, particularly Durabbanans around the issues of Yom Tov. So it's a lot about Yom Tov, and not about Chol Moed. That's a different Masechet. That's Moed Katan. This is about Yom Tov and Muktzah a lot in the beginning. And the other thing that's really worth mentioning right at the outset is that it's an enormous amount of machlokas Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. The Mishnayos, you'll see Mishnah after Mishnah, strings of Mishnayot, which is just here's what Beit Hillel says, here's what Beit Shammai says, here's what Beit Hillel says, here's what Beit Shammai says. There seems like in most Masechtot, the primary speakers in the Mishnah are Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. They're like Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon. They're the students of Rabbi Yehuda, which is very late. I mean, that's one generation before Rabbi. The Mishnah was edited. Like Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, Hillel and Shammai were like 100 years before Churban Abayit. Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai still when there was a Beis Hamikdash around. So what you're really dealing with is a lot of very early Mishnayot, not just early debates. Like it seems like there was almost no editorial hand here of Rebbe in a lot of these. It's really just very straight and simple Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai debates on these issues. It's a fascinating question, right? Why was there so much Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai in areas of Yom Tov and in other areas? I don't really know the full answer to that, but anyway, I think that's the other really distinctive part of the Masechet. Okay, so that's just a few opening remarks relating to the Masechet. Let's get started. Beitzah shenolda b'Yom Tov. Okay, so what happens if you have an egg that's born on Yom Tov? Beit Shammai omrim tochal, Beit Hillel omrim lo tochal. Beit Shammai says you can eat it, and Beit Hillel says you cannot eat it. Why not? Of course, this is going to be the first discussion in the Gemara. Let's for now assume that it's a question of nolad shenolda, which is a type of an issue of muktzah. It's something that was not set aside or could not have been set aside from before Yom Tov began, where Beit Shammai is not bothered by that issue. He says you can eat it, and Beit Hillel says you can't eat it. Now, the question is why, if it's a muktzah issue, then it should not just be a question of eating, it should be a question of moving. So, and we will find in some places that some things maybe you're not allowed to eat, but you still are allowed to move. What is the story here? So we'll think about that when we get to the Gemara. For now, let's assume that we're saying both. If it was a muktzah issue, that Beit Shammai says not a problem at all. Not only can you move it, you can even eat it. And Beit Hillel says don't eat it, but that also means don't move it. That's possible. But their primary discussion here is about eating, and that's going to be a question: is this about a muktzah type of concern, which relates also to moving, or is it something that's fundamentally about eating, which is primarily what you would want to do with this anyway? Beit Shammai omrim. Now, Beit Shammai says, and again, what I mentioned before about a lot of debates of Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, the first Mishnah opens by what clearly was a certain collection of Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai debates, which were joined together because they all relate to Yom Tov issues. But again, this is it seems almost a little bit random. Let's take a look. But the other sort of, I should say, common denominator about these is not just it's Yom Tov, but it's three areas in Yom Tov where Beit Shammai is lenient and Beit Hillel is strict, which often goes against what we normally expect. So that's why clearly these three things were collected together. Beit Shammai omrim seur b'kazayis v'chametz b'kikut tevet. Beit Shammai says that the seur, sourdough, yeast, or sourdough, the amount that you need to transgress for owning it is a kazayit's worth, is an olive's worth, which is and chametz, normal chametz, chametz is kikotevet is like the size of a pressed date, which is larger. So that's and Beit Hillel, and Beit Hillel says zev is kizayit. They're both by kizayit. So again, Beit Hillel is stricter because you transgress even with a smaller amount. Beit Shammai says. I'm sorry, excuse me. Hashochet chayav of biyom tov. Now, let's say one of the things you're allowed to do on Yom Tov is cook, but for us, that's what we focus on is cooking. We take the chicken or the steaks out of the refrigerator and take them off of their wrapping, and our only question is putting them on the fire. But for them, if they wanted to cook and you wanted some really fresh meat, so you go to the backyard and you shecht a chicken on Yom Tov, okay? So, or you even shecht a cow. But let's say you shecht a chicken or a chaya. You decide you're going to have venison. You shecht a deer. One of the things you have to do is cover the blood. Okay, that wouldn't be an issue for a cow, but it would be an issue for a bird or a deer. And you did it on Yom Tov. So now, not related to the necessity of eating would be covering the blood. That's a mitzvah that you now sort of tangentially came about, but it's not specifically related. It doesn't allow you to eat. Isn't part of the process of eating. So what do? Do you cover the blood or not? So Beit Shammai omim yachbor bedeker v'yichaseh. You can actually dig with like a shovel, a hoe, or a shovel, and you can cover the blood. So with the dirt. So presumably disregarding muktzah issues of the dirt, which we saw before. But perhaps even more serious, like digging a hole. Lo yishchot elin kein hayalo afer muchad mibod yom. Don't shecht unless you already had, set aside dirt from the day before that you don't have to dig, and it's not muktzah. You set it aside for that purpose for the day before. By the way, although we tend to think that dirt is muktzah by its very definition, it's not true. If you set it aside, it's not an issue. If you have a sandbox, you can play in a sandbox on Shabbos and Yom Tov. The sand is set aside for playing.
What about digging holes?
All right. I know you don't really dig a hole in the sand. I think it's a bigger problem about putting water in it and making it into mud and shaping it. Yeah, does a hole stay? It's a little thing grooving in the sand. If it's sand, I don't think that's an issue. Anyway, but the problem is water. Anyway, umodim, and they agree. Okay, so anyway, Beit Hillel really did not give, if you think about it, did not really give a straight answer. Because, okay, l'chatchila, don't do it. And if you did it, so what does he say? So the next line says, umimodim she'im shachat, they agree that if you shechted, she'yachber b'dek v'yichaseh, that you can dig with a shovel. So the simple read of this Mishnah is that their only debate is whether l'chatchila you're allowed to do it if you don't have it prepared. But if you actually did it, everybody agrees that you're allowed to dig to cover it. She'efer kira muchanhu. Now this last line opens with a shin but it seems completely not connected. It says everybody agrees you can dig and cover it with a shovel because the ashes from your oven are muchan. Muchan is the opposite of muktzah. So meaning those are not muktzah. Okay, so that's all fascinating, which obviously implies the idea like, if you wanted to use the ashes for your oven, that's a good alternative because that's not considered to be muktzah. But then why are you allowed to dig with the shovel? And why not just say use the ashes of your oven? The simple read of it is, again, the grammar is funny, is that the ashes, it's sort of saying, either have the dirt pre-dug, or if you've got ashes, use that. But if you don't have any of those alternative, then go ahead and dig. Interesting question, why ashes, of the oven would be considered mukhan. When did they become ashes? Before Yom Tov or on Yom Tov? Because you could be obviously having a fire on Yom Tov. So that's an interesting question as well. All of this to be explored. As you see, 2 out of the 3 cases, have definitely strong muktzah types of concerns or nola types of concerns, although the digging obviously raises other issues as well. Yes?
Perhaps, we'll get to it, but I recall you mentioning that you're saying you couldn't set aside the egg. Is that for a halacha reason? Because it's not there? Because I can have in my mind, all right, I know this chicken.
Yeah, so you can't really do a chana on nolad because the whole part of nolad is that it didn't exist beforehand. But we'll talk about that a little bit more. Actually, we'll see a minute in the Gemara, and I'll mention something relevant that Tosfos brings in. So let's take a look now in the Gemara. What are we talking about? If you say, meaning what is the case of this hen that has an egg, that the egg could possibly be problematic. If it's about a hen that is set aside for eating, meaning why are you raising all of these chickens and hens? Are you planning on turning them into meat, or are you planning on having eggs? And the Gemara assumes that you would obviously have different, you could say you haven't made up your mind yet, but the Gemara assumes that you would have different intentions and maybe treat them differently. I mean, we know now in the whole, industry of egg production and meat production, I mean, they really have everything, I mean, it's whatever. It's troubling to even talk about how I don't know. Can you say inhumane about animals? But anyway, how inhumane it is. But they obviously have them. If they're going for eggs, and they have them in a very particular setting in order to produce eggs. And if they have for meat, they have a very different type of a setting. So the Gemara assumes that you also would have a different designation and know what you're planning on using it for. So what type of a hen are we talking about? Yes?
Or is it just saying the egg is part of what you eat from the chicken?
Well, that is what it's going to say.
You eat the chicken, you're going to eat the egg, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that is what it's going to say. But it's going to say the status of the egg depends on what you were planning on doing with the chicken, and which assumes that you have a plan. They're taking for granted that you would divide your chickens based on the egg producers and the ones that will be eventually turn into meat. So, b'may askina, what type of cases are we talking about? Even omedet lachila, a hen that's set aside or standing for eating, meaning that you're planning on using it for food. So, what would be the reason to be strict about the egg? Here, as was just said, it's just food that's separated from food, meaning the whole chicken is basically like, halachically, it's unshechted food, but it's food, unprepared food. Okay, and then this egg was born to it. That's a piece of food that came out of a piece of food. Why should that be a problem? So Ella, I got to tell you, I think I did this once before when we did something else similar in the Daf Yomi. There was a great Far Side cartoon with Farmer Brown surprises the animals in the barn, and they're all sitting around this diagram of a person, and they're like these different sections, and it's cut into different cuts. Like this is the choice meat, and this is the loin. So anyway, so that's what it is. You're looking at this chicken, and it's a piece of food. Here's the breast, here's the thigh, here's the this, here's the wings. Okay, so it's a piece of food. So this is a piece of food that separates from another piece of food. Why should it be considered something new? There's nothing new about it. Although you didn't see the egg before, conceptually, it's just a piece of, it's like a leg fell off. Why should it be a problem? Ella, to go, and again, remember that on Yontiv, the chicken is considered food because you can shecht it. None of this would be true on Shabbos, but on Yontiv, you could shecht the chicken. So the chicken is unprepared food. It is not considered muktzah. It's considered something that you have access to, that you could use. So why is it a problem? Ella, we're talking about a hen that is set aside for laying eggs. So therefore, the hen itself is muktzah. It's not considered something that I have reason to be using even on Yontiv, right? It's just there. It's an egg machine. So I have no use for it on Yontiv. So the egg is something that came from something that was muktzah, and the egg is something new. So why should it be? So that's true. That explains why it's a problem. So then matamai de Beit Shammai. What's Beit Shammai's reasoning that says it's okay? Muktzah, it's muktzah. And shouldn't Beit Shammai agree that there's a muktzah problem? Right? It comes from something that was itself muktzah, and presumably this is an extension of it, and this is muktzah as well. So the Gemara says, Umay kusha, why is this difficult? Dilman Beit Shammai leislu muktzah. Maybe Beit Shammai doesn't hold the whole category of muktzah. So maybe that's exactly the debate. You hold of muktzah or not? So the Gemara says, no. Kasal Kadaitin, we are assuming that the afilu man deshari b'muktzah, even the person that doesn't hold of the category of muktzah, right? Maybe that's a shock to you that there could be some tanaim that don't hold of muktzah, but yes, there are. But we assume that somebody who basically doesn't believe in the category in the whole halacha of muktzah. So, nevertheless, but nolad aser, would still say nolad is a different story, right? And here it's interesting to take a minute to appreciate some different key words that we're going to have, okay? First, let's talk about this pair of words, which is muchan and muktzah, okay? Now, muchan means that it is set aside from before Shabbos. Muktzah is the opposite. Muktzah is sort of pushed away, off limits. Okay, you could say huktzah, set aside also, huktzah limitzvaso, but muktzah also, but muchan means that you're preparing it for use. Muktzah often means that you're designating it or pushing it away, designating it as something you don't want to be using. Okay, now there's a huge gap between muktzah and muchan, which is everything else in the world, right? There's the things that I sort of know that I'm planning on using, and I basically, or maybe implicitly assume I'm going to be using on Shabbos, right? My silverware, my plates, and my food, and my clothes, and all the types of things that I would normally expect to use. That's muchan. Then there are the types of things that I am maktzeh and that I push away. And what are those types of things? Those are things like, first of all, things that I can't use on Shabbos, my matches, my money, things that I don't want to handle because they're very fragile, my Ming vase, my Picasso hanging up in my living room. So these are the types of things that I assume off limits. I don't want to use either in general, or where the Gemara has cases about you're drying food out on the roof, maybe not related to Shabbos and Yom Tov. These things are things that are off limits. I don't generally want to be handling them, or maybe they're off limits because you can't handle them on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Like a chicken, a hen that's around to lay eggs is muktzah because you don't want it, because you have no purpose of handling it. It's an egg-laying machine, and you have no reason to be handling it right on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So those are the things that are muktzah. But there's a huge gap. There's everything else in the world, right, that is not implicitly planned on being used and not implicitly being pushed off from use, right? So what's the halacha about that? Do you need something to actively be mukhan, or something only a problem when it's muktzah? That's an issue we're going to get to throughout, and we'll get to a little bit when we turn to the Yom Ha'atzmaut. Now you have a new category, which is called nolad. Nolad is something which is brand new, didn't exist before. So what Gemara is saying is the following thing. I might not hold that any of this stuff, I might not hold that there's a problem at all, because even stuff that basically I have assumed I'm not going to use, or implicitly or explicitly pushed off, I put it up on the roof, this food to dry out, and I'm basically assuming hands off until it's done with the process. Nevertheless, at the end of the day, it's all, objects under my control, and I, in theory, why would I ever not, want to restrain myself from using anything, right? I have control over my entire environment, so maybe implicitly, even if I'm maktzah it, it's not really something that is considered to be off limit, something that is not accessible to me. But something that gets created, that's brand new, that didn't exist before Shabbos began, that is something that you cannot say was sort of ever in the realm of something that when Shabbos began, it was theoretically able to be used. Okay, and therefore, the idea of saying nolad is a problem, in a way, is that you need the things to be, when Shabbos began, to be, at least in theory, I could have planned to have used this on Shabbat. So even things that are muktzah, in theory, they were under my control. But something that's nolad doesn't fall into that category at all. And therefore, the Gemara is saying, even if you don't hold of muktzah, we assume you're going to feel that nolad is a problem. Okay, and that's the third idea, which is nolad. So I think if you look at Rashi says this much more succinctly than I did. Rashi says like this. Right on top of you see the line on top of the Gilyon Hashas with the little three circles on the far right. So if you go one line over that, the line starts with the word the ilu in Rashi. He says the ilu b'muktzah sfir lei lo maksi inish midaite midi dechazi lei. By muktzah, even if it's something that generally you wouldn't be touching, your ming vase or your fruit sprang out, you never, at a deep level, want something to be out of your access. You never fully push something off. Aval nolad, nolad didn't even exist, so we couldn't even say theoretically it was something that I could have wanted to use. Okay, so that's a more serious category that maybe, even if you don't hold of muktzah, nolad is something that completely did not exist. So the Gemara says, so we're assuming that Beit Shammai, kasal kadaitin, let's read that again, afilu man deshari v'muktzah b'nolad asa. Even if you allow muktzah, nolad, you would agree, would be forbidden, and we can't understand why Beit Shammai would allow this if it was a hen that was set aside for eggs. That should then be nolad. So the Gemara says, "My tamai Beit Shammai." What's Beit Shammai's reasoning? So Amar Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman says, which is probably the easiest read of the Mishnah, La'olam eternal. Someone else got a beitzim. It's like we were assuming just now. It's a hen set aside for laying eggs. V'di islay mukta islay nolad. V'di leislay mukta leislay nolad. And the one who holds of mukta obviously holds nolad as a problem. But you know what? The one who rejects the idea of mukta rejects the idea of nolad as well. Categorically, this is always an interesting question, right? Which is, if you're debating, do you agree in principle but you disagree in the application, or you fundamentally disagree? And the Gemara said that we assumed everybody held of nolad. It meant you fundamentally agree there's an idea that things have to be ready before Shabbos begins. You're only debating the application, the particulars. You might say things that you guys call muktzah, I don't think that those really are considered not ready. It's in the world. It's ready. No, that's not ready. But in principle, you agree that there's an issue of things being ready when Shabbos begins. What the Gemara is saying here is, no, actually, Beit Shammai rejects it in principle. There is no concept of something having to be ready from before Shabbat. And therefore, even Nolad is not a problem, because they don't hold of Muktzah and they don't hold of Nolad. They don't hold of this concept at all. So therefore, who cares it wasn't ready before Shabbat? It's okay. And therefore, the debate of Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai is that Beit Shammai considers this to be Nolad and therefore a problem. Excuse me, I said it wrong. Beit Hillel considers this to be Nolad and therefore a problem, and he holds of all these categories of Nolad and Muktzah. And Beit Shammai doesn't hold of Nolad, doesn't hold of Muktzah, holds that everything is totally fine. Who cares that it's a new thing? Now, again, I tried to say that the Gemara frames this as a categorical debate. Of course, one of the big problems we're going to get to when we learn this sugya is that nobody had like statements that sound very categorical. There are always a lot of exceptions. So, for example, we're about to introduce an idea that there's a position of Rabbi Shimon. This is much later. This is Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. Position of Rabbi Shimon that the Gemara says Rabbi Shimon leis le muktzah, doesn't hold of muktzah. And then you said, asterisk, except for the 5 times when he does. Okay, so even though the Gemara says that Beit Shammai doesn't hold of muktzah, doesn't hold of nolad, Tosfos points out a few places where Beit Shammai does have some problems with some things like this. But we're not going to worry about fitting that all in. Now we're going to accept it as a categorical exception. Another important difference about the idea of nolad is a point that Tosfos makes. Michael sort of asked this question. There are degrees of nolad. There's something that sort of the matter, if the physical matter existed, the physical matter of the egg existed, but it wasn't like in our domain, it didn't exist for us. But the physical matter existed, but something new got created out of it, right? And that could be a concept of nolad. If you take something that was ink and paper and you turned it into a newspaper on Shabbos, is that nolad, right? Because it didn't exist sort of in this form. But there are ideas of nolad where the materials existed, but then something new was created out of it. This idea of the Beitzah is an even more drastic idea of nolad, because that's like, as far as we're concerned, the egg didn't exist yet, and now it comes into existence. This is obviously even more drastic, and that's a point that Tosfos makes, just to be aware that there are different degrees of these things.
So coming into existence from something that already exists includes changing form.
Right, or it could. The question is what degree of changing form. Some, for example, poskim think that water into ice or ice into water is nolad. I don't think that, I think that that's a very weak position. It's based on, whatever, I don't want to go into what it's based on, but, that's like a simple state change, right?
Right.
Right, but state change is obviously also different than combining different materials and creating something brand new out of it, right? Just ink and paper, and now you have a book, right? So anyway, there's different degrees of nolad, yes.
Does it matter that we might have an expectation, like when we used to speak about dirty to the sand, it might create the problem? So here, we might expect that a hen might lay an egg.
Oh, so that is a very good question. And by the way, that's part of the point that Tosfos makes as well, which is, if you actually know that this hen is about to lay an egg, and you say, I know it's about to lay an egg, and I'm making an announcement, I am planning on eating that egg, I am setting aside the egg that's inside the hen from before Shabbat. So, excellent question. So, it's dealt with in Tosfos, and the basic answer is that doesn't help. Because since it doesn't exist, you can't set it aside. It is funny, because it's like not visibly accessible to you, it cannot be prepared and set aside. It's like it doesn't exist, so it doesn't matter sort of what your intention is. But again, there might be cases where it does. So it's always, these things are not absolute, but Tosfos, addresses exactly that, yes.
So it sounds like this is the same answer, because I was going to say, if you shech the chicken on Chag,
yes,
and you cut it open and there's a whole egg in there, you can eat the egg.
So we're going to deal with that. But if it was a hen that was set aside, but it was a hen that was set aside legado Beitzah, which is what we're talking about right now, then you wouldn't be able to shecht it. It itself would be no shecht. But that's already the word says is okay even when it lays the egg. If it was set aside to be eaten, right? So that's the last point that I wanted to make here, which is important about that. the Gemara says it's only considered nolad if the hen was set aside to lay eggs. Now, as opposed to set aside to eat. Now, you intuitively might have thought the opposite. You would have said, set aside to lay eggs. I know an egg is coming out. It's like David says, right? That's not nolad. I'm planning on eating it. Set aside to eat. I'm not expecting it to lay eggs. Oh, that's something new. So it's a little strange that the Gemara assumes the reverse. But here's the idea behind what the Gemara is saying. If it is set aside to eat, then the egg coming out is not seen as something different from the chicken. It's like when it was in the chicken, it was part of the food of the chicken, part of the chicken as a piece of food. And now it's just a piece of food that sort of grew a little bit or came out a little bit. But it's not like conceptually different. Although physically you didn't have the egg in front of you before, it's not something new in terms of this, like real halachic man. You're going around with these conceptual categories. So although physically it's new, conceptually it's not new. It's just a piece of food that fell off from another piece of food. Whereas if I have a hen-laying machine, although an egg-laying machine, although I expect it to produce eggs, an egg is something different from the machine, right? The machine is there to make the eggs, and the egg is what it's producing. So this is conceptually something new and different from the machine that produced it. Okay, that's sort of the concept behind it, but again, it is a little surprising. Okay, so let's take a look.
Is there a distinction between Shabbat and Yom Tov? Because when you're talking about an egg on Shabbat,
Yes.
you're assuming you're going to eat it raw?
Well, yeah, that's a good question about food that's raw and so on. But you could eat a raw egg, and that would not be a problem. But Shabbat is so that would not make it more problematic. But Shabbat is more of a problem because you couldn't eat it because in all cases the hen would be out of your reach because it wouldn't be theoretically edible on Shabbat. Okay, so now let's continue. So the Gemara says like this. So where are we? Okay, so Beit Shammai Rabbi Shimon. So now again, it's a little bit funny that the Gemara is making an association based on Tanoim that came much later. But for the Gemara, the category of those that don't hold of Muktzah is Rabbi Shimon, who says Rabbi Shimon Leisli Muktzah. So Beit Shammai Rabbi Shimon. Beit Shammai holds like Rabbi Shimon. Ubeit Hillel Rabbi Yehuda, and Beit Hillel goes like Rabbi Yehuda, who holds of the category of Muktzah. Okay, very easy explanation of the Mishnah. Do you hold of Muktzah and Nolad or not? Did Rav Nachman really say this? That Beit Shammai doesn't hold of Muktzah and Beit Hillel does? That's none. We have a Mishnah. Beit Shammai Omin. You have the bones left over from your chicken and the shells left over from your walnuts, and now they're on the table. Are they muktzah? There's no use for them. Now, of course, Tosa says that, points out, the question is, are they fit to be eaten even by dogs? Rashi says no. Tosa says yes, but they're still considered muktzah because they're not, or they might be considered muktzah because they're not fit to be eaten by humans at this stage. So what do? So Beit Shammai says you can pick them off, clear off your table, no problem, pick up the bones. Beit Hillel says, no, you can take the tablecloth or, the table, if you're talking about like a tray, and, shake it out and dump the tray into the garbage, but you cannot directly handle. Why? This is an idea called tiltu min hatzad, that by muktzah, you're allowed to move things indirectly. Now, there's a whole ranges of why, what defines indirect, or when is something just an extension of your hand, tiltu min haguf, as opposed to tiltu min hatzad. Don't worry, we'll get to that. But the basic idea is you're only handling it indirectly, and that gives you much more latitude. Tosos asks, what about the issue of buses? You might know this idea that if you keep something, you put something on a place before Shabbat and it was there all bein hashmashos, right? Let's say something that was muktzah, like the candles burning, on the candlesticks, basisa davar has, or the candlesticks also become muktzah because they were a base, a support for muktzah. The easiest answer here is that this stuff wasn't on bein hashmashos; it got produced on Shabbos itself. But anyway, that's Beit Hillel. Beit Hillel says it's a muktzah problem, move it indirectly. Beit Shammai says not a problem. So that's perfect. It works in perfectly with our Mishnah. Beit Shammai doesn't hold of muktzah, and Beit Hillel does hold of muktzah. So everything would have been wonderful, except along comes the same Rav Nachman, and look what he does. The Amar Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman says, Anu, ein lanu, we don't hold of like this version of the Mishnah. The only version we accept is Ella, Beit Shammai Rabbi Yehuda, or Beit Hillel Rabbi Shimon. Beit Shammai goes like Rabbi Yehuda. Beit Shammai is strict and goes like the position that there is muktzah, and Beit Hillel goes like Rabbi Shimon that there isn't. And basically he reverses the opinions in the Mishnah. Beit Hillel says that you can remove the bones, and Beit Shammai says you can only indirectly move the table and shake off the tablecloth, shake out the tray. So Rav Nachman, you did yourself in. You explained this Mishnah, which you can't switch around, because this Mishnah clearly is Kulei Beit Shammai and Chumrei Beit Hillel. This Mishnah where you said Beit Shammai doesn't hold of muktzah, you had another Mishnah that supported you by Shabbat with the bones, and you reversed it. So how are we supposed to make sense of this? So let's take a look. Amalacha Rav Nachman will say to you, Gabi Shabbos, by Shabbos, the Stam Lan Tanik Rabbi Shimon, we have a Stam Mishnah relating to Shabbos that goes like Rabbi Shimon that says there is not a muktzah problem. What's the Mishnah by Shabbat? Now, we taught in the Mishnah. You can chop up raw gourds before animals in order to make them edible. Now, that's not a muktzah problem. The gourd was plucked before Shabbat, whatever, pulled out before Shabbat, or plucked, and grows on a vine, right? Gourds? Yes, okay, it was plucked before Shabbat, but it is a problem. You might thought it's a problem because it's like you're making something that's not edible in that current state. By chopping it up, you're making it edible. You might have thought it's a problem, but no, you're allowed to do that. It's not considered an unnecessary torah or another problem of making food. That's okay to do it for your animal. And this is the relevant part for us. Let's say your animal, your cow drops dead on Shabbat, okay? Or it's muktzah. You had no use for your cow on Shabbat, right? You couldn't have shechted it. It wasn't Yom Tov. And now, can you take this dead carcass and chop it up and make dog meat out of it and feed to your dog and feed to your animals on Shabbat? So the Mishnah says, yes, it's not bothered with a muktzah problem, okay? Even though clearly this was something that was not set aside from before Shabbat. So that's a Stam Mishnah that doesn't hold of muktzah. So therefore, since that Stam Mishnah doesn't hold of muktzah, we're going to assume, and we assume the halacha is always like Beit Hillel, so we have to align Beit Hillel with that position, that on Shabbat, there's no muktzah problem. So mukim lo Beit Hillel to Rabbi Shimon. So therefore, if we say by Shabbat, Beit Hillel goes like Rabbi Shimon, there is no muktzah problem, which is consistent with the Stam Mishnah. Aval, Gabe, Yom Tov, turn the page, bet I'm a bet, by Yom Tov, the Stam Lan Tanik Rabbi Yehuda. There, the Stam Mishnah by Yom Tov goes like Rabbi Yehuda that there is a muktzah problem. Where's a Mishnah by Yom Tov that assumes there is a Mishnah problem? None. We taught in a Mishnah in Beitzah, a Mishnah we're going to see later on. If you have beams that are set aside on a construction site, and now it's middle of Yom Tov, and you say, you know what, I didn't prepare enough firewood. Let's go to that construction site. Well, let's assume it's not Gaza. Let's go to my construction site and take some of those perfect beams and use them for the fire. No, I mean, that's muktzah. It's muktzah set aside for the construction purposes. So you can't do that. You can't chop those beams. Or let's say, a roof collapsed on Yom Tov. Can you now go ahead and use this beam from the collapsed roof on Yom Tov? That's sort of like the animal that died, right? When Yom Tov began, it was like, I have no use for the beams that are part of my roof, but now that it collapsed on Yom Tov, now it's in a usable state. But when Yom Tov began, it wasn't. So that's a muktzah problem, and it says, don't do it. So we have the animal dying on Shabbat, no problem. The roof falling in on Yom Tov, problem. So what's the explanation? It must be on Shabbat we hold of muktzah, and on Yom Tov we don't hold of muktzah. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. On Shabbat we don't hold of muktzah, and on Yom Tov we do hold of muktzah. So it must be that there's a difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov. So he says, so let's take a look. So by Shabbat, the Stam Mishnah is like Rabbi Yehuda that holds of muktzah. I'm sorry, I said that wrong again. Did I say it wrong? No, I said it right. No, excuse me, by Yom Tov, not by Shabbat. I'm sorry, I'm confusing myself. Got it. Let's start again from the top of the By Yom Tov, the Stam Lan Tanik Rabbi Yehuda. By Yom Tov, the Stam Mishnah is like Rabbi Yehuda. This is again a Mishnah in Beitzah. You don't chop wood from stuff set aside for to be construction beams. And not from a beam that broke. So that Mishnah holds a muktzah on Yom Tov. So mukim lo Beit Hillel to Rabbi Yehuda. Rather than saying that the Stam Mishnayot are not in agreement, we're going to assume that the Stam Mishnayot are intentionally Stam, and therefore are the halacha. And therefore the halacha is, and we also assume the halacha is like Beit Hillel. So we see that the halacha is that there is no muktzah by Shabbat, there is muktzah by Yom Tov, and we're going to adjust Beit Hillel to be in line with that. So our Mishnah that says by Yom Tov, Beit Hillel holds a problem, that there is a problem of the Beitzah Shenolda by Yom Tov, that's where Beit Hillel holds a problem, fine. That's the Mishnah about the beams falling in on Yom Tov, and Yom Tov is that there is a problem of muktzah. By Shabbat, we have this issue about the animal that died in the Neveva. It tells us that there is not a problem of muktzah on Shabbat. So this debate of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai about picking up the bones on the table, we're going to reverse the positions to get Beit Hillel consistent with the halacha that there isn't a problem of muktzah on Shabbat. So now we have to ask, what is this bizarre idea that there's a problem of muktzah on Yontav and not on Shabbat? Okay, so let's take a look. So the Gemara says, 1 minute. Why on Yontav is the Stam Mishnah like Reb Yehuda that there is a problem? The Mishnah about the beams falling in. So and not. I'm sorry, I skipped a line here. So the Gemara says Michti. Let's take a look. 4 lines from the top. Man Stame Lemasnisin. Who is the one that chose which Mishnayot to make anonymous and therefore to have the weight of authority? Rebbe. It was Reb Yehuda Nasi. Why by Shabbat did he choose to have the anonymous Mishnah embody the position of Rabbi Shimon and say that it was not a problem when the animal dies on Shabbat? And why in Yontav the Stam like Rabbi Yehuda? Did he make the Stam Mishnah like Rabbi Yehuda and say that on Yontav it is a problem by the case of the beams falling in? Why is it not a problem on Shabbat and it is a problem on Yontav? Why did Rebbe adopt opposing positions? So the Gemara says like this. Ammi, you'll say, Shabbat dechamira, below asi lizulzuleba. Shabbos is strict, so people are not going to treat it lightly. So Stam like Rebbe Shimon, he paskin like Rebbe Shimon, to make it that's lenient. You don't need to have muktzah on Shabbos. You treat Shabbos seriously enough. Yontav the Kiyov Yontav is more lenient. You can do all these types of things. Besides, it's more lenient at the punishment. It's not like Chayav Misa. It's only a lo taseh. But also, you have a lot of latitude. You're shechting. You're cooking. So there's a lot of reasons why you might a little bit. I mean, for us, we do so little even on Yontav. Like I'm always having this debate with my wife, which is like, he cooks all the food for Yontav ahead of time. I say, you're allowed to cook on Yontav. I say, I'm going to buy some steaks, put them in the fridge. Come Yontav, I'm going to grill them up. So, and I think Sfardim, I hear even on Rosh Hashanah, they have barbecues, right? Okay, so imagine that not only were you doing that, you were going out to your field and shechting your chickens, right? So obviously on Yontav, you have a lot more latitude. So there's a more likelihood you'll forget the Kedushat Hayom, you'll forget the sense of restriction. So therefore, we're going to have muktzah and limit the types of objects you can interact with, which makes a lot of sense. If you're very conscious of the objects you're interacting with, you're much more conscious of the fact that it is Yom Tov. So therefore, Yom Tov, the key of Asi Luzuzule based Damlan to Reb Yehuda, we go like Reb Yehuda Demachia. Now, I want to say two things about this issue. First of all, right, the Gemara is almost a little aware that, or what it's framing it as, is not like there is a Tana out there that holds of these contradictory opinions, these different opinions between Shabbos and Yontav. Rebbe made a conscious choice to say, I'm going to paskin, like Rebbe Shimon on Shabbat and not have muktzah, and I'm going to paskin like Rebbe Yehuda on Yontav and have muktzah. So it was Rebbe who decided to have this split vote. So that's pretty funny, because then presumably Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai never split their vote either, right? It was only Rebbe who finally decided to have this interesting split vote. But still, if we want Beit Hillel at the end of the day to go according to halacha, we're going to reverse who said what to make Beit Hillel consistent with halacha. It seems very manipulative, right? Why not just assume Rebbe had a split vote? It wasn't earlier, but we wouldn't want Rebbe to pass against Beit Hillel. But again, did the Gemara really think that Beit Hillel held the opposite position, or was it just we have to do that? We have to reassign Beit Hillel to make it line up with the halacha. So that's like one interesting question. Now, if you think that sounds too manipulative, I want to read you a Rashi, which is Rebbe deciding to make a Mishnah a Stam Mishnah. Right? What does that mean that he chose to make it a Stam Mishnah, that it should have the weight of authority? So if you take a look, like I would say, okay, by doing that, he communicated to us, this is the position that I hold of, and maybe the fact that he held of it gave it weight. If the Shulchan Aruch passed in a certain way, and that book becomes accepted and canonized and so on, then that's where it carries the weight. But we all know it's the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch. Rebbe is communicating to us his opinion by deciding which Mishnah to make Stam, to make anonymous. But look at what Rashi says. Rashi says something which is harder to get your head around. He says, 4 lines down in the narrow lines, Man Stam lan lemasnisin, who was the one that decided which Mishnayot to make Stam? Rebbe who sider ha-Mishnah, Rebbe arranged the Mishnah, Notice by the word arranged, because a lot of the Mishnayot pre-existed, and most of what he was doing, or almost all the Mishnayot pre-existed, was just arranging them. When one of the opinions seemed correct in his eyes, Shina'an Stam, he taught it anonymously. V'lo hiskir shem omro, did not mention who the author was. Alehen, kidei shelo yushnu yimi pi yachid, it should not be attributed to a single opinion, just one person's opinion. V'nir'in ki'ilu nishnu mipi hamerubim v'yasu kamotam, to give the impression that this was a consensus opinion and everybody would follow it. So not just to communicate to us how he paskined, he did it to make us think it was a consensus opinion. I don't know what to say about that. Like, you're duping, he's duping us, Maybe you could reinterpret Rashi to say that he gave it the voice of consensus. We all understood it wasn't the consensus, but he gave it that voice. But anyway, it's a quite strange Rashi that seems like Rabbi was trying to deceive us, that this was a consensus opinion. Yes.
There was Amorite discussion about that Mishnah in Shabbos.
Yes.
And if I remember right, they rule with Rabbi Shimon.
Well, right. There's a question about how in the end we rule, but now we're working within Rav Nachman. So let's just review what we've said. We basically have said that Rav Nachman takes an easy explanation of the Mishnah. Beit Shammai doesn't hold of Muktzah. Beit Shammai doesn't hold of Muktzah. Beit Hillel does. It actually is consistent with other Mishnayot in Shabbat about Beit Shammai not holding of Muktzah and Beit Hillel holding of it. But because Rebbe paskins differently in Shabbat and Yom Tov, Rav Nachman also, rearranged the position by Shabbat to have it consistent with the psak of Rebbe, that by Yom Tov there is Muktzah and by Shabbat not. But in terms of explaining our Mishnah, it's really quite simple. It's a debate of whether there is Muktzah. Beit Shammai says no. Beit Hillel says yes. Maybe it's specific. Maybe Yom Tov is different than Shabbat. But at least by Yom Tov, that's the debate. Let's see where the Gemara goes on. It says like this. Okay. What have you said that our Mishnah is talking about? A chicken that's out to grow eggs. And that's set aside for growing eggs, for laying eggs. Umishum muktzah, and it's a problem of muktzah, and that's the debate. If so, says the Gemara, ademiflik bebeitzah, why are they debating, just the egg? Livthugu b'tarnagoles, debate the hen itself. If you chose to eat the hen, that's also a muktzah problem. And say Beit Shammai says fine, and Beit Hillel says no good. So Gemara says no. Lodicha kochan de Beit Shammai, to tell you the strength of Beit Shammai's position. The benolad shari. But he is so lenient. Not only does he allow the hen, which is only a muktzah problem, he even allows the egg, which is nolad. That's how lenient he is. So the Gemara says, so tell us the case of the hen to show us how strong Beit Hillel is. That not only do they forbid the egg, they forbid the hen. So the egg is a bigger chiddush to Beit Shammai. They're so lenient they allow the egg. But tell us the hen, which is a bigger chiddush to Beit Hillel. They're so strict they don't even allow the hen. So the Gemara says, you'll say no. The power to say something is permissible is greater than to say it's forbidden. Like Rashi, anybody could say it's forbidden. I don't know if you should do it or not. Better not to do it. So it's always easy to say it's usher. It takes real conviction and real belief in your position, to say that I'm going to allow it. I don't think it's a problem. So we'd rather tell you how powerful Beit Shammai's position is. They even allow the egg. I just have to tell you about that. It's always easier to say it's us. Rabbi Love tells a story about, I forget who it was, but some big posek in Yerushalayim, there's this book out of his psakim, but they're like one-line answers. Anyway, so somebody asked him, Imutar l'sachek kadorsal b'Shabbat. Can you play basketball on Shabbat? So he said, Maza kadorsal? What is this? So it's a mischak kazeh shesamim kadur b'toch sal, And so he said, Yoter tov lasim et hakadur b'toch hasal lifnei haShabbat. So anyway, all right. All right. So anyway, why not tell us the principle? So maybe that's why you say the egg, to show you that Beit Shammai is so lenient they even allow the egg. So that's why we're focusing on the egg. Mar says, no, I'm not satisfied. V'niflog b'travayu. Why not still debate both of them? It would not be a lot of effort to include the hen in the discussion. It's not like a new thing to point out. All you have to do is just modify the Mishnah a little bit. Why not say the following? Tarnagolas omedes legado beitzim. If your hen is set aside for eggs, he who beitzasa, it and its egg. Beit Shammai omim tocha. Beit Shammai says you can eat it. Beit Hillel omim lo tochal, not eat it. Now, of course, it's a lot more words. Beitzah shenolda b'yom tov is 3 words. This is a lot more words. But the point is, it's not like really a different scenario. So just discuss the hen itself. It was really about muktzah. We'd be discussing the hen itself. So now the Gemara is going to abandon Rav Nachman. Now I have to tell you, that's a pretty weak answer to abandon, which is a pretty straightforward interpretation. We see Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai debate about Muktzah. It's a pretty straightforward interpretation. One of the things that it seems like the Stam is doing is that there's a lot of interpretations of the Mishnah. And rather than just saying, Rav Nachman says, this is what's going on, Rabbi says, this is going on, so-and-so says, this is going on, it's going to give us a reason why we have to now look for another explanation. So it says, Rav Nachman doesn't work so well. It should have mentioned the hen. Let's try to get another explanation of the Mishnah. But it is really a weak reason to reject a very reasonable, strong reading of the Mishnah. So let's see what the Gemara is going to use that as a way now to get to another read of the Mishnah. So read number 1 is a hen set aside for eggs, and that it's an issue for laying eggs, and it's an issue of muktzah. Yes.
But when the Stam does that, it's part of its agenda, perhaps, to introduce these categories that you wouldn't have thought
Exactly,
of.
particularly in an
Make
opening
some
sugya.
ideas.
Right, and particularly in an opening sugya in particular. But here again, sometimes what you see is in the Yerushalmi, this whole sugya could be 3 lines. It could be, Rav Nachman Amar, B'tarnagolas Omedes Legado Beitzim Mishum Muktzah. Rabba's going to say X. So-and-so, somebody else is going to say Y. It'll be, the whole thing will be, there are 3 opinions, move on. And here we have a whole narrative exploring these ideas and then giving us a reason, like, to move on to the next idea. But you're right, we're trying to present all of the ideas. Rav Nachman seems to be a very straightforward read. Let's see where the Gemara goes now. It sounds like this. So the Gemara says like this, Amar Rabba. Let's go back, where the hen was set aside in order to be eaten. And therefore, it's not nolad, because it's just like a piece of food coming from a piece of food. So what's the problem? Actually, we're talking about a special case, or the special case is the reason behind all of this. What's the special case? When Yom Tov comes after Shabbat. Umishum hachana. And the problem is that it isn't prepared. What does that mean? Because Sava Rabba, and here's that idea of Hachana I mentioned before, Rabba holds, Kol Beitzah de Misyalda Ha'idna, any egg that was laid today, Ne'esmo Gamrla, was already finished yesterday. So it was already ready to come out yesterday. And let's just line up all these things and then I'll unpack it. The Rabba L'taimei, Rabba goes according to his reasoning, the Amar Rabba, because Rabba says, it will be on the 6th day they will prepare what they're going to do, right? The Torah had already said, right? It already said, do all your cooking, do all your baking, so why does it have to again say, prepare? It already said, do all your cooking and baking. So to tell you, weekday has to prepare for Shabbat. On a weekday you have to prepare for Yom Tov. Yom Tov cannot be preparing for Shabbat. And Shabbos cannot prepare for Yom Tov. So what does all this mean? So if it meant you actually doing the cooking and so on, so that obviously you can't cook on Shabbat to Yom Tov. You don't need Rabbah to tell me that. The chiddush here is about something like this, which is it was prepared, but you weren't the one that prepared it. You weren't violating Shabbat in order to make something for Yom Tov, or violating Yom Tov to make something for Shabbat. No, it was just this thing that was growing naturally in the chicken, the egg that was ready to be laid. But what is not a problem that you did some act of violation, but the reality is this egg, if you want to use it on Shabbat, it has to be prepared from beforehand. And it cannot have Yom Tov being the time when this egg became now ready to be used from Shabbat. It has to be ready on a preceding weekday. It's a hard idea to get your head around, because as Rashi points out, you would think if there's a problem for Yom Tov preparing for Shabbat, the bigger problem should be for Shabbat preparing for Sunday. So how can I eat an egg that's laid on Sunday? I shouldn't have something that was prepared on Shabbat for Sunday. But again, the problem isn't the way Rashi frames it, that somehow the Kiddush of Shabbat was violated because this egg was being prepared. Then it would be obviously a bigger problem. It was prepared on Shabbat. Somehow that was violated Shabbat, that the egg was being prepared for Sunday. It all happened automatically. The problem is not a sense of violation. The problem is, the way Rashi says it, is that the Torah gives chashivut, weight, to the Seudah of Shabbat and the Seudah of Yom Tov. And therefore, for something to be able, and this is Rabbi Mike talking specifically about things about eating, and remember the egg, the Mishnah did not talk about moving the egg, it talked talked about eating the egg. So the point is, if you want to eat something for Shabbat, you want to eat something for Yom Tov, you have to, it's like Rav Soloveitchik had this beautiful line. He said, in America, we have a lot of Shomer Shabbos Jews. What we don't have enough of is Shomer Erev Shabbos Jews. Like what Erev Shabbos is like, what it means to really see Shabbos is coming and prepare for it. So if you want something to be part of your Shabbos meal, it has to be prepared, not even by you actively, but ready, objectively from a weekday. And it can't have been ready even on a Yom Tov that precedes Shabbat or Shabbat that precedes Yom Tov. It's weekday is when you do things, when things have to be done and ready to be used for a meal of Shabbat and Yom Tov. So that's the idea, even though it's not about you doing an action, even though it's about something passively. This is called Hachana de Rabbah, which is Rabbah sees this based on a biblical verse, on a pasuk. It might even be a Doraita according to Rabbah, but it's not the same as all the rabbinic area of Muktzah. Exactly what the overlap is and how far he would extend this, but this again has a real focus on the Seudah of Shabbat and Yom Tov. Maybe it's only a problem of eating. Maybe he would say you'd be able to move the egg. Maybe it's only an eating problem because it's about the Seudah. And it is this idea that things you're going to use. Now look, to some degree, when I put on the board Muchan, a lot of Muktzah is you have to prepare things from beforehand. So the question becomes, well, is Rabbi saying that all categories of muktzah are hachana and so on? So again, not necessarily. This could be specifically in areas of food and the meal and preparing for it, and that has to be ready from the weekday, and this egg wasn't ready. This egg is ready the day before it's laid, and if Yom Tov preceded Shabbat or Shabbat preceded Yom Tov, it wasn't ready on a weekday, and for him, that is a real problem.
The assumption is one day.
One day, yes. Charlie, you had a question?
Yeah, so if you can't prepare on a festival for Shabbat and it's biblical, how can an Eruv...
Okay, that's an excellent question. So Tosfos asks that. So Tosfos says, if even by it happening by itself you can't prepare, how can we cook from Yom Tov to Shabbat? And Tosfos says, and this ties into the point I said before, there are degrees of, like the same way there are degrees of Nola, there are degrees of Muchan. If the raw materials are all in front of you and they're just like lacking preparation, now of course it's a little funny because the Psukim talk about Eis Asher Tochlu, Ve'eis Asher Tevashlu Bashelu, but Tosfos nevertheless, he says, I'll read the line in Tosfos, he says, these things, she'einu mechusar rak tikun ba'alma, the meikara havichazi le, that was there, all you need to do was fix it up. As opposed to the egg, which came totally brand new, right? Which is sounding again like this type of a nolad issue. But you are right; it's a little bit strange because the whole psukim are about cooking and so on beforehand, and now we're saying no. This idea really, is an idea of it just existing beforehand, being prepared in the sense of existing beforehand. So it really limits the idea of Rabbah. But it's a very good question. The other thing I should point out is that. Who mentioned Yom Tov? The Psukim talked about preparing before Shabbat, right? And by Yom Tov, you're allowed to cook. And so for Tosfos, it gets also into this question Tosfos is always asking is, did the man fall on Shabbat or not? Right? Because since he can prepare and do stuff for food on Yom Tov, the Psukim never say it didn't fall, which then leads to the question of, do you have Shtei HaLechem on Yom Tov? Major position in Tosfos that you might not need Shtei HaLechem on Yom Tov because you didn't have a double portion of the man on Erev Yom Tov. Anyway, this is Rabbah's explanation. Let's just quickly wrap this up. It says like this. So the Gemara says, Amalei Abaye, so Abaye said to him, Elamiata Yontav ba'alma tishtari. So, okay, but I'm just talking about a regular Yontav. So I understand that's your paradigm case of a Shabbos preceding Yontav, but a normal Yontav should be okay because the egg was finished the day before. No, Gzeira Mishum Yontav Achar Shabbat. We're not going to allow any Yontav because of the scenario of when Yontav comes after Shabbat. Shabbos to Alma Tishtari. Now a normal Shabbos should be allowed, which is a little funny because a normal Shabbos the hen is muktzah, but okay. Gzeira mishum Shabbat ach Yontav. No, because of also we're concerned about the paradigm case of when Shabbat follows Yontav. So basically he's saying there's this paradigm case of Yontav after Shabbat. Our Mishnah doesn't allow even a regular Yontav as a derivation of that. This is certainly the most complicated explanation. One more line. Umi gazrina, do we really make these types of gezerot? V'atanya, we turn a Beitzah. Hashoged, and here's the question that was raised. Hashoged at the tarnagoles umatzah ba'beitzim gemurot. You shechted a hen on Yontav, and you found completed eggs in the hen, and this presumably was a hen that was set aside for eating. Okay, so again, it's a part of the hen, it's food. Mutaris la'ochlam b'Yom Tov, you can eat it. All right. So the Gemara says, "V'im isa." If you have this idea of Rabbah that even by a hen set aside for food, the things have to be prepared from beforehand. So it sort of says like this: I get that when it's in the hen, it's considered to be part of the hen, and we don't think of it as something different. Okay, and therefore you don't say, oh, a little bit of the hen put on some fat the day before. There's like a little fat that was put on. I get why in principle it's allowed, because it's not seen as something new. But if you make zeros, so we should make a gzera that you can't eat the eggs inside the hens because of the eggs that will be laid. And if we don't allow the laid eggs, we shouldn't allow the eggs in the hens. It says no. Amalei, Beitzah gemurot b'nei iman milsa delo shchichahi. Finding unlaid eggs in their mother's womb when you shecht it is something that is not common enough. It's a womb, whatever. It's not a womb. It's not a mammal. And something that's not common, the rabbis did not make a gzeirah. So again, although it's this whole complicated explanation of hachana, it really is a type of a nolad. But the nolad is that it was something new was created, and it was created, finished being created the day before, and that's a problem when you have Yom Tov backed with Shabbat, but from there we're going to forbid every case of Yom Tov even by itself. A hard explanation both because it makes it a special case and because the exact idea behind Rabbah preparing automatically, not your own preparing, but it being prepared by itself. As Charlie points out, you're allowed to cook, but you can't have an egg finish. It's a hard idea, but the Gemara will move on from this tomorrow to look at yet another explanation. Okay? We'll end with that.
The only cog that can come directly after Shabbat.
What?
Shavuot.